Hey, HTDA, and this is a step-by-step playthrough of Motemancer, showing you how to build an efficient base and provide you with some tips and tricks along the way. Now, keep in mind, I am playing a pre-release build, and although this game is very playable, it is also very actively being developed, so things might change in the future. Now, the first minute or so of the game consists out of playing through a little bit of a storyline, where basically you are told that you're in school to learn about all the elements and how these things interact with each other and how they develop. Now, your teacher is going to send you through the portal, and that portal is going to malfunction, and you will need to find your way back. Once you go through the portal, you'll find yourself on the plane of life, and you want to make your way over to the nearest live zone over here that you can start looting items from. You're going to want to first harvest up a couple of these motes of water, but of course you don't want to keep doing this forever. Keep in mind you can just press the button if you want to speed things up. You don't need to click on every individual thing on the ground, so it should make clearing out the ground around this area pretty quick. A little bit further down to the south, you'll find a live area very similar. It's the green version of the things on the ground that you see in blue over there. And in case you're wondering, you don't have to worry about this spreading out too much. You're going to be just fine. This is just preventing you going back through the portal. Once you got a little bit of resources in your inventory, start making some salt and ether. And remember, if you right click on these things, you'll make 5 at a time. Just alternate them and make sure you keep producing something in the background. There's no point in just carrying around these motes. They're not really used for anything for the moment. With those materials, we're going to start making some collectors and grindstones. And you want to make 2 of these collectors for every grindstone you make, because that will allow you to do something like this. We can place a simple collector on one of these areas over here, and then we can use another one to place it a little bit further away so that we can sneak a grindstone right in between, and that allows us to put a mana flare right in the middle of those, powering all of these 3 buildings. Now, why do we want this ratio over here? Why do we want 2 collectors for every grindstone? Well, a simple collector is going to produce 1 mote every 4 seconds. So now we get 1 mote every 2 seconds because we have 2 of them. And if you look at the grindstone recipe, this is going to produce 1 salt every 2 seconds. But we also need 1 mote coming in. So we need 1 mote per 2 seconds coming in. So we can have 1 salt per 2 seconds going out. And the same ratio and logic applies to the ether setup. Which means that on the green area of the map you do exactly the same, just to remember to keep track of where the collector is outputting its items, and that will place them directly into the grindstone. Now at this point I want to point out that if you want to loot stuff from a building, rather than going manually through this output, you can just hold control, click the building, and then loot whatever is in there. And that's a very easy way to collect stuff from multiple buildings at the same time. Now there's a couple of other things to note. You want to kind of recharge your mana flares if you can before they run out. It's just faster to do it like that. And something else is that you might be worried about the fact that there's a limited amount of motes on the map, but there's so many of that you definitely don't need to worry about those running out anytime soon. Then the next step, as the game already suggests, is to build at least 1 Infusion altar and a couple of pedestals. Now in reality, you're probably going to want to have a couple of these, so you can already overproduce a few if you want. But generally speaking, you want to make sure you have all the basic materials like collectors and grindstones first. So just keep producing those in the background while you do other stuff. Then you're going to want to produce some salt prisms, and while you do that, you're going to want to place down your altar. I recommend doing that somewhere on the edge of your factory, because this is an end station, an end product type of building, so there's no routes going to go out of here. Then we're going to place the pedestals somewhere on the blue line around it. We're going to make sure everything is powered. And then, last but not least, we're going to put some salt prisms in one, and then we're going to put some ether in the other. And you can see this is now being absorbed by the altar, which means we can start thinking about acquiring some technology. The technology tree in Motemancer can be a little bit overwhelming, but the best thing is just to look at what you currently have available, what you're already producing, and then work towards that particular technology. In this particular case, we want to start working our way to the top left, because this is going to give us access to all the things we need to start automating our factory. In specific, we need to repeat the same thing we just did, namely putting some salt prisms and ether on the slabs, twice more in order to unlock simple logistics. So, just do that twice more, and then we are good to go to make sure we can get this automated. Now, in case you place something wrong on the pedestal like I just did, you can just take it out. And don't forget to keep recharging your flares. Once you complete the technology, it will start lighting up in the bottom corner. You can click on it in the technology tree and voila, we now have this available to us, which means we can start making chests and grippers, and you want to make a couple of both. Because what this will allow you to do is put a couple of these chests right next to the pedestals over here, but just a single step away, and then we can place down these grippers in between and make sure stuff automatically goes from A to B. Now, all we need to do is put some of those salt prisms in one chest, some ether in the other, and then make sure we have a mana flare again right next to there to make sure everything's powered. This will now automatically put stuff on the pedestal and it will be absorbed for research. Now, of course, you might need some additional ether to get that, so you just run back down and then place the remainder of that in here, and this will make sure this is completely automated as long as you keep putting in resources. Now, of course, when I say completely automated, that's not entirely true because, of course, the stuff is not going to go into those chests all by itself. So we want to unlock the shifting slab. These are basically our conveyor belts from other games, and these are going to transport things from A to B. In the meanwhile, we will also start working on the Tinkerer's table because those requires the exact same type of resources that we're already producing, so it should just be a matter of seconds to complete this as well. Once you have these three technologies, it's time to really start automating a factory. Now, what I recommend doing is initially just building a little bit of everything so you can get your resources automated, you can get some of your main building production automated, and then start scaling that up as and when you actually need that stuff. However, first things first, start making some of these shifting slabs so you have some conveyors to work with, and also make yourself more grippers if you don't already have them in your inventory. Now, if you want to scale up your production in this game, you could do something like this, taking full advantage of the hexes in this game. These are not squares, these are hexes, so you do need to think a little bit about how you build stuff. And if you make sure that only a single edge of each of these buildings is touching the middle, you can place 6 buildings around that, which means you can have 4 of these collectors, 2 of these grindstones, all feeding into each other, having perfect ratios, and thereby producing whatever you need from that particular field of modes. And then what you can also do is, for example, do something like this, have a chest, have a flare to power the gripper, and then all the production is being put in the chest, and you can stock up quite some resources. However, there's a couple of reasons why this is not necessarily super efficient. It's very easy to do, so it's a nice go-between. But you're wasting a little bit of space because, well, these grindstones don't actually need to be on this fertile ground where the motes are coming from. These could be collectors instead. What's also kind of annoying is that you're outputting stuff on multiple sides of this particular production line, which means you'll need to have additional grippers, additional conveyor belts in here. All in all, this is not very efficient. Instead, what I recommend that you do is you build 6 of these collectors all around, make sure that the outputs are facing outward, and collect those outputs from your buildings by means of a belt. You don't need grippers to have stuff go out of your collectors because that's automatically being put on here. And because we now have 6 collectors, we can put 3 grindstones and make sure we get things going through those. Now, if you want to make it look a little bit pretty, what you can do is, for example, something like this, and have the grippers going in and out, have a box over here, and then mana flare in the middle. Again, make sure you use the hex grid to your advantage. This is going to draw this stuff into these grindstones and then put it right in the box over there. And of course, we have a total of 6 collectors over here, so we kind of need 3 grindstones to make use of all of that. So you can just keep repeating this pattern if you want by adding some more grindstones, some more collectors, and some more boxes if you want. And then again, just make sure you keep powering everything as efficiently as possible. Repeat this on the other side of the map, and now we have the 2 base resources in full production, and we're actually already producing 1.5 per second of both of them from the get-go. All we need to do is make sure that these mana flares are being topped off. Now, of course, we're going to need some more than just these basic resources, because we already have one advanced version of that, and that's the salt prism that requires both salt and ether in order to be created. And this is needed for pretty much everything else going forward, so you definitely need to automate this as well. Now, in case you're wondering what you should be automating next, then the typical suggestion I would give you is look at your technology tree. Right now, there's two ways we can go. We can either go towards the underground slab, which requires salt prisms and ether, which we were already making, and then some shifting slabs along with that. Or we could go down, and that requires the same three things, but the simple gripper in addition to that. So that means that the next easiest thing to make would be the underground slab, and that requires us to automate both the salt prism and the shifting slab because we have neither of those yet. In order to make prisms, all we need is some salt and ether to bring that together in a equal ratio, and because this also has a production speed of 0.5 per second or 1 per 2 seconds, depending on what you prefer, that means that if we combine one output of the grindstone of salt and one grindstone output worth of ether, that is going to be exactly the inputs we need for one grindstone worth of prisms. Now, because we have 3 of each, we can just combine those belts together and then have a total of 3 grindstones making prisms. Now, I recommend outputting the stuff you are producing straight onto the belt rather than in a box and then back on the belt, because that just limits the amount of grippers you need, and you want to be a little bit thrifty, I would say, with your resources early on. And like I said at the beginning, I recommend producing a little bit of everything early on. So we're going to keep things simple. There's 2 of these grindstones putting out stuff onto this belt and the same thing on the other side. So we can have 2 grindstones making the prisms, and we can set that up very efficiently like so, grabbing it from one belt and then grabbing it from the other belt, and again powering this all the way in the middle, and this is going to be producing a lot of those prisms. Now we are going to output those prisms on this side, and then we're also going to do that on this side, and of course put a box in there so you're not wasting any production. Make sure you power these as well. But the reason we're putting them on the outside and rather than all feeding this into the same box is still A, it's easier to power this, but B, we're going to need some of this production in order to automate our slabs. Now, if we combine the output of our remaining salt production with the output of one of our grindstones making prisms, we put all of that stuff onto a incoming belt along with a couple of grippers and a tinkerer's table, we can start mass producing slabs. Now, remember, slabs are very fast to produce. It actually produces 2 of them per second, or it would if we actually are supplying it with enough resources. Right now, we're only giving this building half the resources it would need to function at full speed. But 1 slab per second is more than enough. We do need 2 of these grippers to go out of the building in order to actually be able to absorb all of this production. But as you can see right now, I'm producing exactly at the same speed I'm outputting, so it's kind of like stuck on alternating between 8 and 10 in the building. And I have already a lot of slabs to work with. Since we now have both the prisms and the slabs completely automated, that means it's trivial to complete all the next 3 types of technology. So underground slabs, which allows you to build some belts underground and have them pass over each other. The elemental binder, which we're going to go back to in a second. And the extended flare, which is just going to make your mana flares last longer, so you don't need to work as hard to replenish them. Okay, so just a couple of short notes. You can definitely use some chests in your production lines, especially when those are production lines like this that completely get to a standstill pretty quickly, because that allows you to just use this as a buffer. You can get some of that salt going from this thing over here in case you need it for something else. So just keep that into consideration. You might also be tempted to completely automate your resource, having belts go from your production centers towards your pedestals. You can definitely do that, but especially early on in the game, it's really not needed. You're going to shift between the research so often that it's just not worth all the logistics and all the spaghetti that it results into. It's a lot easier just to put stuff into a box, and that is going to be more than enough to complete several types of research, and it's just a lot easier to set it up like that. Similarly, if you want, you can actually just handcraft a lot of stuff early on in the game and feed it to your pedestals manually rather than automating it like I just did. Now, the downside of that is that even though it's going to speed up the first couple of hours in your game, it is going to slow you down later on because you are still going to have to automate a lot of stuff once you just need large amounts of it, because handcrafting is very inefficient. Just gonna put it out there, there's not a single way to move forward, and there's definitely different approaches that you can use. Just think about whatever you prefer for yourself and use that method. As long as you're having fun, you're doing it right. Personally, I just like automating things like belts, so I never have to think about that ever again, and I just dump whatever resource I need into the boxes in front of my pedestals and have that take care of itself. As you can see, I've already completed the elemental binder, and now we're moving on to the next part of our technology tree. While we're waiting for the extended flare to be produced, we can start worrying about other things. Instead of going down the technology tree like you might expect, and there's nothing wrong with doing so, I would recommend that you go for the Tree of Life technology parts next. This is going to allow you to automate your power, which is just going to make everything else, literally our quality of life, a lot better moving forward. In order to do that, we're going to need that elemental binder that we're currently researching, because that is what is going to produce those elementals for us. Other than that, in case you were worried that you were running out of research, it also opens up quite a bit of the technology tree, and trust me, this is only the beginning. Make yourself a couple of elemental binders. Then we're going to make a temporary facility with two of these simple collectors hooked up to a grindstone. Yes, I know this isn't exactly what I told you not to do, but don't worry, this is going to be very temporary. This is going to feed salt into a belt. And then on the other side, we're going to make a very similar layout with two collectors going straight into one of these elemental binders. We are, of course, also going to need something to put the stuff in and to get the stuff out again along with the box. Make sure all of that is powered, so this is actually working. And voila, we should now be creating our first elemental life. Grab the first elemental life that you produce, put it into a box that links up to your infusion altar along with some salt prisms, and there you go. You are now working your way towards the Tree of Life research, and you also want to make sure you immediately start the Mana Bloom research after that, and after that, just make sure you keep going for the biorhythm. All three of these are going to make your life a lot easier, and honestly, the leaves production as well is going to be vital. So again, just make sure that you keep working your way through this technology chain while you are building up the rest of your base. This is an excellent moment to start clearing out the secondary mode of life patch that you have over here, because you're going to need it. Once you get those first two technologies, make yourself a couple of mana cultivators, a whole bunch of mana roots, and mana blooms along with that, just a couple of these. Now, the main way these things work is basically these are going to be your power generators, these are going to be your power cables, and then the mana blooms are pretty much your power stations that distribute that power across your other buildings. Now you might notice that the mana blooms actually almost cover the entire mode field, and that is no coincidence. Because that allows you to do fun things like this. This single mana bloom is in the range of all of these collectors and will be powering that as soon as we connect the mana bloom itself to some actual power. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do this, but the most straightforward way is just building one of these mana cultivators. Just make sure you place it somewhere close to the actual output of the collectors. Then we are going to connect a single gripper to that, and then all we need to do is make sure we power that and get the process going. Now this collector over here is going to produce some motes. Those motes are going to go into the mana cultivator, and it is going to generate 300 power. Now this thing is actually pretty efficient, so it's going to generate plenty of power, and in order to make sure this is going to power everything else, there's a couple of ways you can do that. First of all, you can use these mana roots, which are going to serve as your power cables, to just directly connect that to any building. As you can see, this blue power grid is now being expanded by these roots, and now we have two of these collectors producing motes. The more straightforward way, or more efficient way I should say, to do this is just run the roots all the way around, connect the roots to a mana bloom, and now this mana bloom is going to make sure that all the other buildings in the range are going to be powered, and look at all those resources now flowing in. Now, look at the amount of stuff being consumed. The current generated power is not correct, actually, it's a little bit bugged, but as you can see, a single mana cultivator produces 300 power, and we're only consuming 635. So all of this is consuming only about twice the power of a single mana cultivator. Now what we want to do is make sure we just keep adding mana cultivators, so we have plenty of power to power everything else we want to do. It's worth noting that right now these mana cultivators are super efficient. One mode lasts for 30 seconds, which means that a single collector can actually fuel up to 7.5 of these mana cultivators, each generating 300 power. Now, that's a lot of power just from a single cultivator, let alone all of these cultivators that I'm currently powering. So this is going to allow you to make an entire kind of like power factory, if you want to call it that. That is going to then allow you to power pretty much everything else in your starting facility. So at this point, you can really start to scale things up, which is also why we've kept everything rather small until now. Before I show you a setup that uses all of this automated power, I do want to point out that by now you've also probably unlocked the Biorhythm, and that is a super powerful spell. So if you activate it, you'll get this green glow around you, and then whenever you move closer to one of these mana flares, it will automatically start charging. So if you want, you can keep relying on these mana flares for a very long time, because, well, as you can see, it is now super easy just by walking around your factory to charge these things up. And you can actually power entire buildings just by standing next to it with this activated. You don't even need the mana flares to do it at that point. Now, as fun as it is to run around with an aura that generates all kinds of power, I like my power automated. So I suggest that you build yourself a whole bunch of these nice little mana cultivators, get yourself a power grid working, and automate everything that you've built so far. Now, you don't need to make it look pretty, because I promise you, you are only maybe a couple of minutes away, well, maybe a little bit longer than that, but you are going to want to redesign your entire base pretty soon. Because we're about to get access to 2 more elements. First of all, we have elemental water, and then second of all, we have elemental earth. Now, the elemental water is going to give us the streamway, which is an upgraded version of the belts that we've been using so far. This is all a lot faster. And then the earth is going to give us access to the reaching gripper, which is going to allow us to grip things from 2 spaces away rather than just 1, which is going to make the belt logistics a lot easier than it currently is. Luckily, the nice thing is that if you go south from the portal, there's elemental earth over here, there's water over here, and there's life over there. And we can combine these 3 things in a very similar layout like we have over here to produce all of that. So make a little similar setup to mine a whole lot of earth modes. We're going to be utilizing these later on, but for now just make sure you have at least a single elemental binder ready to make some earth elementals. And in order to make those, you're going to need some ether as well. And we have already plenty of mode production over here, so you might as well utilize some of that towards making ether. Now, we're going to do a very similar thing down here with the modes of water, so let's get that going as well. And then you can just do the same thing all over again for the elemental water, so you have that in production as well. And again, we're using the ether we're producing all the way up here in our little power facility. Now, all of this should be plenty to power all of this as well, so you have a fully automated facility making all the different types of elementals. Now, all you need to do is grab some of your prisms and then start some new research, and I recommend that you do that in a different infusion altar, because you can actually work on multiple different technologies at the same time, as long as they have unique types of things they require. While you're waiting for those 2 types of research to complete, I also recommend that you either make yourself some leaves and unlock the inventory slots that this particular technology gives you, or I should say, get yourself the rampant bloom, because this makes it a lot easier to spread your power fields. So here we go, we have the streamway, which is going to be 4 times as fast as the belts that we're currently using, and we have the reaching gripper, which is going to allow us to, for example, do something like this, where we can have 2 different items going into the same building, so that makes the logistics of actually trying to optimize production a lot easier. At the same time, at this point, you've probably been playing for several hours, so I'm gonna keep scaling up this factory to the more modern version of it to the next episode. If you're interested in that, please make sure you join me. If you're still here, you are awesome, and I definitely hope to catch you in the next one.